Creation, brokenness. And then God did something we wouldn't have done, because when in your family, remember when you were a kid and you were given a law or a rule and you broke it, you remember what your parents did, right? Or when if you're a parent and your kids break a rule, your first response. God's response to all of this is amazing and it's unpredictable, and yet this is when the theme really begins to surface. God, instead of just totally stomping everything out of existence and starting over, God, in turn, turns around to creation and the created ones, into the first men and women, and to humanity. And you know what he does? He makes a promise. He makes a promise. I'll show you. I'm going to promise you something. And I want to read you a passage of Scripture that really starts to cause my jaw to drop, because this is absolutely amazing. It's found in Genesis. I'll just read it to you. It's found in Genesis chapter 12, because here's what God does. God's got this big broken mess. Everything's broken. His relationship with man's broken. Relationship between people's broken. Creation's broken. Now there's conflict. Now all of nature goes crazy. Everything's broken. And God decides that he's not going to give up. And so he reaches down, and we don't know why, and we don't know, what drove him. He reached down and he chose a man. And we don't know why he chose Abraham. There was nothing special about Abraham. My theory is that it was such a big mess, he had to start somewhere. And he just went, let's take with him, because it doesn't matter. They're all broken. They're all lost. They're all mixed up. They're all worshiping idols and worshiping pagans. Nobody knows who I am anymore. It doesn't matter. Somebody just pick one. All right. Well, he picks a man named Abram that becomes Abraham, and he singles him out, and he makes him this promise. Now listen to this, especially if you're like somewhat skeptical and I don't know about the Bible, and it's just listen to this. This is amazing. Okay, listen to this. Chapter 12 of Genesis. The Lord said to Abram, who later becomes Abraham, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. And I will make you into a great nation. This is like 1780 BC, okay? This one just happened. This is like way, way, way long time ago. He says, and I'm gonna make you into a great nation. Time out. God or whoever this is. What's a nation? Oh yeah, there really aren't any of those to speak of yet, are they? Okay, well, nation is like a family that gets really, 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 really big. Okay, I have a wife, and we're not able to have kids. I think maybe you randomly picked the wrong person. Now listen to this, okay? This is awesome. I will make you a great nation, ready? And I will bless you. Check this out. And I will make your name great. Abraham, almost 2,000 years, way, way, way long time ago, or 2,000 years. 3,700 years ago. In the desert, we can't even find where this happened. I'm going to make your name great. Now, here's a quick survey. Not counting today, okay? Not counting today. Not counting this sermon. How many of you had heard of Abraham before you got here? Whoa. It happened, didn't it? See, that's when I start going, whoa. We got ancient literature, even the most liberal of liberal scholars. This is ancient literature. And there's a writing in here about a guy, and God supposedly says, I'm going to make your name great. And in 2006, everybody in here had heard of him? It's more than that. Listen to this. Listen. The three major world religions, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, we all trace our spiritual roots back to this guy. And the most fought over controversial piece of real estate now, not ancient, now has to do with this guy. That's amazing. I mean, that's undeniable. It just happened. You say, well, that doesn't prove God. No, it doesn't prove God, but wow. That's amazing. And listen to what God said to him. This is great. I'm going to make your name great. Verse 3, and I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Creation, we broke it. God made a promise to Abraham. He said, Abraham, I know this isn't going to make any sense to you now, but a long time from now, people are going to read this and their jaws are going to drop. I am going to make you an entire nation. And then from that nation, I'm going to bless everybody who ever lives through you. Well, Abraham and his wife Sarah finally had a son. And that son, Isaac, had some children. And one of those sons, Jacob, had 12 sons. And then there was a famine where they lived. And so they all moved to Egypt, and they liked it so much they just stayed there. But they were just a big family. And they kept having children, and another generation. And finally, there were so many people related to Abraham, it started to look and feel like a nation, but they lived in Egypt. They had no real estate. All they had was, their homes in Egypt. And the Pharaoh decided there's too many of them. Let's make them slave labor so that they won't become more than us. And they enslaved all the Hebrews, and now it was a nation within a nation that was a slave nation. For 100 years, then 200 years, for 300 years, for 400 years, the nation of Israel was in the nation of Egypt as slave labor. And if you had been born in the middle of those 400 years, you would have heard the story of Abraham, and by the time you were 30 or 40 years old, you would have been like many of us and said, you know what, I don't believe that. Some old guy and God says, I'm going to make you a great nation. We're not a great nation, we're a slave nation. And you could have been born and died in slavery and never seen the fulfillment of that prophecy, and rightly so, have been very, very, very cynical and suspect that there was anything to it, nothing's going to come of it. My father was a slave, my grandfather was a slave, his father was a slave, I'm a slave. It's just bogus. These are just stories they tell children so they'll have faith in some God that doesn't exist, so they'll do the right thing in case God's going to judge them. But obviously, the whole thing is made up because we're slaves. That's not coming true. We don't even have any real estate. And where is this God? But God was writing a story. And one day he appeared not far from there to a man named Moses. He said, Moses, I've heard my people's cries, and I'm going to deliver them now. We're going to have a new chapter. Moses said, that's a great idea. What's that got to do with me? And God said, I'm going to send you. And Moses said, but I can't talk. He said, I know, that's why I chose you. He said, but I've already been to Egypt once and failed. That's why I chose you. So let me get this straight. I'm going to go tell the most powerful man in the world, Pharaoh, that I would like for all of his day laborers, for all of his, laborers, for everybody that basically makes the country work, I'm just going to go say, I'd like to take all those people with me now. We're going to leave. God said, yeah, that's what I want you to do. Moses said, there's no way it's going to work. And not too long after that, all of the day laborers in Egypt packed up and followed Moses out of Egypt. And the most powerful nation in the world, their economy was decimated. And they marched out because God was still alive, and because God made Abraham a promise, and because he was writing the story of redemption. And in that moment, we see redemption. God actually physically taking a nation out from another nation, buying them out of physical slavery. And we come to the next chapter in the story, and it's a chapter we call law. Because suddenly, now you got a group of people who don't know God. They have no laws. They have no religious writings. All they have are these fictitious stories about a guy named Abraham, and I'm so sure that's going to come true. And suddenly, maybe there's a God, and maybe God's going to actually do something. And Moses takes the people to Mount Sinai, and God says, now that I have redeemed you out of slavery, now that I've bought you out and brought you out, now that I have loved you, I want to reveal to you who I am. Now that you've done nothing for me, but I've done something for you, I want to reveal to you who I am. And he tells the people his name. And he gives them the law. And in the law, we discover the values of God. And we discover that God values relationship between people, relationship between he and people. We find out what's important to God in terms of how things are done and how things are not done. And then the amazing thing about this part of the story is that with the law, this is so cool, with the law, God provides provision for those who break the law. The assumption being, here's my law, I know you're going to break it. Here's my law, I know you're going to screw up. Here's my law, I know you're not going to pull it off. Why? Because you're broken, and I've not yet fixed you. And here's the amazing thing. When a person broke God's law, they had to kill an animal. Now, that wasn't new because that was, people sacrificed animals before, but God took this ancient tradition and he married it to the law as if to say, when there is sin, there must be a death. When there is sin, there must be a death, because a long time ago, when the sin entered the world, my relationship with man died, man's relationship with himself, with each other began to die, and man's relationship with the creation began to devolve and erode and die. And I just want you to get it through your head that any time there's a sin, there's going to be a death. And the death of this animal will not pay for your sin. The death of this animal is just going to cover temporarily your sin. Here's my law. Here's what you do when you break the law, because I know ultimately you're going to break it. Well, the next chapter is the word rebellion, because not only did the nation of Israel break God's law, they abandoned his law. Not only did they break his law and not make sacrifice, they abandoned the entire sacrificial system. And first and second, everything in the Old Testament, first and second, everything in the Old Testament is the story of rebellion. It's the story of God sending prophets to the nation of Israel saying, whoa, you got to come back to me. And the kings and the nations saying, we want to do it the way the surrounding nations do it. Then every once in a while, a good king would arise and he would reestablish temple worship and reestablish the sacrificial system, and God would bless the nation. Then another king would come along and say, no, this is too hard. We're not just going to break God's law. We're going to abandon God's law. And they would rebel against God. And God would warn and send invading armies. And then God would remove the invading armies and send invading armies, and back and forth throughout the Old Testament to say to this nation to whom he'd given his law, whoa, don't abandon me. And finally, God had had enough. You can read the story for yourself. And he scattered them to foreign nations. And he drove out the royalty and the wealthy people. And he scattered them. And for all practical purposes, Judaism was dead. The nation of Israel was dead. There was no more temple worship in many of those years. And again, this is so important. If you had been born during the years of captivity, if you had been born between the New and the Old Testament, if you'd been born in any of those segments, you would have been tempted to say, like many of us say today, whoa, what's all these stories about Abraham's going to make us a great nation? We're not a great nation. We're a slave state again. We pay taxes to Rome. We pay taxes to the Assyrians. We pay taxes to the Babylonians. We pay taxes to the Persians. We're not a great nation. We are a nation that is subservient to the nations around us. Obviously, all those myths and legends about Abraham and God's going to bless everybody through Israel, obviously that was a hoax. Why should I believe in God? Why should I trust God? Clearly, there is no God like the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. You could have been born and died in any of those generations and never seen or heard from God. Your kids could have. Your grandchildren could have. But God is a God who keeps his promise.